This is the unrestricted free agent.
The Jimbo Fisher stuff. Were you in the room the other day when he threw?
I was. Part of the reason we had so much fun being Clemson was because we used to talk a lot of shit to them and they couldn't handle it.
You feel fine, but your hands are shaking.
Coach Spurrier couldn't give a damn.
I want to take these athletes and mentor them.
Why can't the Gamecocks win at the SEC tournament?
So sunny all the time, so hot.
Too sunny.
Too sunny.
Fans are going to be fans, and people who understand the sport are going to talk sports.
With some weird dynamics.
It's going to be painful, but I think at the end of the day, we'll be stronger people for it.
Strong we can get on a Wednesday morning at the end of June. Welcome in, June 29th, 2022. I'm sounding awfully froggy this morning. I don't know what that deal is. Still pushing past a sinus thing. Hope your morning's off to a good start. Anthony starting us off on the YouTube live stream. Good morning, UFAs. Anthony says good morning to you too as well, sir. What do we got today? Mark Kingston, Carolina baseball coach, meeting with the media yesterday for the first time since the season was officially over after that SEC tournament loss, or mentioned sometimes you just drop the ball at the plate. And that to me was kind of a lasting image. Yesterday's session was interesting, I would say, for multiple reasons. And we'll get into some of those details. But the headline here, especially if you're watching on the YouTube, Twitter, or Facebook video live stream, you can see it. Kingston vows improved season. Says South Carolina will be better. Well, he knows they have to be better. And one of the first questions was, what about your kind of year recap meeting with athletic director Ray Tanner? How did that go? Was there any kind of parameter set out there? And he said it went how it usually goes. Here's why the team did what it did. Here's how it's going to improve moving forward. Here's how we're getting there and the whole thing. So kind of business as usual, that press conference in a lot of ways. But everybody from the outside looking in understands that's not quite where South Carolina baseball is, having missed the NCAA tournament, going under 500 for the first time since Ray Tanner's first season 25 plus years ago. So I did find it interesting in multiple ways. And then the big news for Gamecock baseball yesterday came out, I think, not too long after that press conference, which was also kind of telling, as DC weighs in on the YouTube live stream with a morning, everyone. Good morning, DC. And Julian Bosnick has put himself in the transfer portal. A big-time name, big-time arm for the Gamecocks. One of the explanations for why last year didn't go as well as it did, the main explanation for it is because of injuries, especially to key pitchers like Julian Bosnick. Now you see Julian Bosnick in the transfer portal. And it makes me, I give you a quizzical look as I say it, and makes me kind of scratch my head and say, okay. I thought Mark Kingston had a chance to get out in front of that yesterday, but didn't talk in any specifics when it came to the transfer portal. Said he could not do that with guys coming in. And I guess I get that from an official standpoint. You got to be all signed up and ready to go. And maybe that's the same situation with guys on their way out. I don't know. Didn't specifically talk Colin Burgess, the catcher, either. So maybe that was just a position that he was in and he was unable to do it. But certainly you can get around those things, right? I mean, we see it on Twitter all the time now with coaches and commitments. And we saw it over the weekend with Pup Howard and the Gamecocks, and Shane Beamer just happened after the news popped out to send out a celebratory tweet that just said, let's go, with a bunch of Spurs flying there, the hand sign. So we know there are ways around it if coaches are motivated enough to do it. So again, I get it. Maybe that's the technical explanation that you can't get into specifics in the transfer portal, but not addressing that situation at all, not addressing the rivals coming in, other than to say that a lot of good players are coming in the transfer portal, and Kingston saying he feels really good about what's what his program has done, some needs it's fulfilled, some good players they brought in. Interesting yesterday for sure. And again, we'll continue to discuss this morning as we roll on. Thanks for joining us in the live stream portion here. If you're hopping on at 8:05 this morning, 8 to 10, the new live stream time. Backed it up a little bit. Starting the day a little bit earlier here on Tim Hill UFA. TimHillUFA.com is always the website to go if you need any kind of information. And then the Tim Hill UFA for the social media channels all over the place. Got Instagram here recently, trying to get that going, along with Twitter, the Facebook, and YouTube channel. A subscription to that is always appreciated. And the more you can interact and put the word out, the more this show grows. And it is greatly appreciated. On the football note, article up on CBS Sports, Barrett Salig, their college football writer, ranking the Gamecock football schedule as far as strength of schedule or how difficult it is, 10th in the league. So it has been much more difficult in years past is the way that I read that ranking there. 1 through 14 was how it was set up, and the Gamecocks getting all the way down to 10th as far as strength of schedule or difficulty of schedule. That's about as good as you can ask for, right? But we'll break that down as we continue to roll on. The larger scheduling news yesterday came from the ACC, releasing their 3-5-5 plans. You know, I give the ACC some credit. We don't say that often, talking football in the state of South Carolina. Got to give the ACC some credit here. Their media days happened, or their meetings, I should say. Media days are coming up in the next several weeks here in the middle of summer. Their ACC meetings, the news trickled out about the 3-5-5 schedule and how they're going to get rid of divisions as well. And man, those divisions in the ACC, and never, maybe that just shows my age. I just never got a handle on them. I think I figured out mainly who Clemson needed to go through, but the Coastal and the Atlantic division, and it didn't make any sense to me because you have the Atlantic Ocean. It's on the coast, right? Maybe that's just the beginning of that. I mean, it's not as dumb as Missouri being an SEC East, but I just never got a handle on exactly who was where in the ACC. And it's the same in the Big Ten, which doesn't have 10. The same in the Big 12. It doesn't have 12. At least give the Pac-12 credit for changing their name from the Pac-10 to the Pac-12, right? But ACC putting out its schedule, I got to give them credit for the 3-5-5 model. And I'm hopeful that will be the model that the SEC adopts, but just adding one more game and going 3, 6, and 6, the 3 permanent opponents, then 6 teams in one year, a different 6 teams in the next, and you do that math, you got 6 plus 6 equals 12, plus 3 equals 15. You're going to have 16 teams in the league, so you'll play all of them every 2 years. And the ACC doesn't have to do that with expansion here, so they can stick with their 8-game conference schedule, but they're going 3 permanent opponents and then 5 rotating ones. They'll switch every other year, and you get everybody coming to your campus, to your football stadium once every 4 years. Much better for fans. As far as fairness goes, I think it's about as good as you can do. It's never going to be completely fair and equitable for every team in your conference, especially the way that, I mean, the ACC is the wildest, isn't it? Talking about a college football parity standpoint, I was talking to a Wake Forest grad yesterday, and she mentioned to me how, oh yeah, when she was there, they went to the Orange Bowl, and in my head, growing up in the 80s, Wake Forest football, very similar to Vanderbilt football. Just the other school in the Power 5 conference. The one that clearly was a little bit different than the others. Good morning to you too, Hope. Welcome in. So talking the ACC releasing its new schedule and fairness in college football is just whatever that year's schedule looks like, right? And that's why you just can't set it up in a completely fair and equitable way. You only got 12 games, and it is massively important. So it's more important than other sports just because of the limited games and how tremendous an impact wins and losses have on your season, on what's going to happen, right? And so the ACC putting it up, 3 Clemson opponents, Florida State, Georgia Tech, and NC State. I'd say a pretty good draw for Clemson from a football standpoint. I always mentioned that, man, I knew it wasn't going to happen, and it didn't make a lot of sense necessarily. But if Clemson got Florida State, Miami, and Virginia Tech as its 3 permanent opponents in the ACC, well, that would certainly improve their strength of schedule every single year if you got those matchups, the 3 football schools, the 4 football schools in the conference. But NC State typically plays Clemson pretty well. Florida State is just a shadow of its former self, but Mike Norvell charged with getting them back. And I don't know, maybe it shows my age. I'll be surprised if Florida State doesn't get back to somewhere close to where it used to be, at least a top 25 program. Troy said, I nailed who Clemson's 3 would be and 2 other teams. 2 right on 6 teams, 5 teams. I got only 1 right. And yes, I have a lot of free time. Thank you for mentioning that, Troy. Well done, sir. Get a light going on in the old studio here. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like you can throw out the guesses there. Everybody can play commissioner or conference office. And there's no way to do it completely fair and equitably. So Troy, being our resident ACC expert, being a resident Clemson fan, who would you say got the best draw as we sit here right now? Because it's kind of ridiculous. That's why I brought up Wake Forest, right? I mean, Wake over the last 3 or 4 years, maybe 2 seasons for sure, you got to put them out of 14 teams. Where do you put them? You got to put them in top 5, don't you? In the ACC, which is mind-blowing to me. Wake Forest has been a better football program than Florida State and Miami, I think, in the last couple of years. Again, for someone who grew up in the 80s, mind blown. The only thing that sticks with me for Wake Forest football growing up is watching Brian's song, learning that Brian Piccolo played at Wake Forest before my time. I mean, that's it. So I give the ACC some credit for kind of leading the way on this thing. It was the pod system that had gotten a lot of original traction, I think, from an SEC perspective and changing things. And it was kind of like divisions, but it wasn't going to be, the standings weren't going to be necessarily determined by divisions because it wasn't going to matter if you won your division or not. You're not going to have a 4-team playoff or anything to get to a conference championship. So then that kind of paved the way for the idea of this permanent opponent deal. And I like the idea tremendously. Troy says Wake actually got the best draw, in my opinion. I'll look up exactly who that is. We'll pull up that graphic because the graphic is busy. Let's put it that way, right? It's got all 14 teams on one side, and then so it's 4 logos, right? All of the teams lined up on the first column, and then there are 3 permanent opponents to the side. And so there's a lot going on, right? I'll get that logo pulled up for us here, and we'll check it out, and we'll see if we evaluate it in the same way as what Troy was saying. Here's the graphic. Okay. Got it here for us. Let's see if we can share the screen and check it out here as we push the buttons. in the first few minutes of the program. How about that? We're trying to get savvy. Duke, Georgia Tech, and Virginia Tech. Troy gives us as the Wake Forest permanent opponents. So let's check how those stand compared to the other ones here as we share the screen and pop up the ACC video, or the ACC graphic, I should say. There's so much there. Here we go. We got it popped up. Get my face out of there. And all right. So you see it right now on the screen. 1 division, each team 3 annually, other 10 league teams twice during the 4-year cycle, hence the 3, 5, and 5 schedule. So I see Wake down at the bottom. Duke, Georgia Tech, 2 of the weaker teams in the ACC. You have to put Georgia Tech at the bottom. Trying to think who else I would put down there. Syracuse down in there. Yeah, I think Duke in the last few years. So agreed. I think Virginia Tech, pretty strong there. Florida State gets Clemson, Miami, and Syracuse. So 2 tough ones there. Clemson and Miami. I guess Miami not as much. And then Syracuse, a bit of a break there. Let's see. Pitt gets Boston College, Syracuse, and Virginia Tech. I might put Pitt at the top of the list as far as good draws. North Carolina, a pretty good one too. Duke, NC State, and Virginia, although Virginia seems to be on the upswing a little bit. Georgia Tech, maybe the toughest one. I think that's fair to say right now. Clemson, Louisville, Wake. And I never thought Wake would be in the list there. Virginia Tech's draw, Pitt, Virginia, and Wake. Another one that you could put at the top right now. Virginia's draw of Louisville, North Carolina, and Virginia Tech. Certainly not an easy one either. So, again, I haven't done this much in my football talking career, but I got to give the ACC credit, leading the way here in college football in a lot of ways. 2023 through 2026, they're saying. So this is going to be not this upcoming season, but the year after this, and for 4 seasons by my math, right? 4, 5, 6. I counted 1, 2, 3, 5 on my hand. It's early. Still not quite 8:20, so you have to give me a little leeway. But good for the ACC here. I am a fan of this system. I think, and the main reason I'm a fan is because it's better for fans. And Trey says Wake for sure won this. But that's the thing we got to remember, right? Okay, 23, 24, 25, and 26. Those 4 years. And this is something Mark Kingston talked about. In football, it's not quite as drastic. We don't have the drastic example yet anyway. And I don't think we will, because there's so many scholarships and you have to have so much depth. You have to have so many players, and where Alabama is from an SEC standpoint, where Georgia is from just an SEC or national standpoint, I don't think we're going to get ever what we got in baseball. I don't think we're ever going to see an SEC team go from winning a national championship to finishing last in the conference, which is exactly what happened with Mississippi State this year. I don't think we're ever going to see that in football. Mandy might be a big reason why. Maybe one day. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe the transfer portal will be that important. Maybe parity will creep in football to some degree, like baseball, but I just don't see that happening. And Mark Kingston talked about it with Ole Miss, right? Ole Miss was struggling. Gamecocks took 2 out of 3 from them this year. And then they hit their stride and win the national championship. Crazy run. You don't see it in college football like that. So I want to say, be careful for how we are evaluating. Don't over-evaluate it or overstate it right now. How it looks right now is not how it's going to look a few years from now. But college football, we know, moves a lot slower than basically any other sports league entity out there. It takes a while for things to change. I'm trying to think of examples outside of that. Maybe Wake Forest is one of them, but
They have been a respectable football program for a while now. Trying to think on the other end, Florida State, I guess on the other end. Nebraska on the other end. It does seem like kind of a battleship type deal in college football, that it takes a while to turn things around one way or another. But maybe dropping off the map can go a lot quicker than turning things around for the positive. But notable and interesting for sure yesterday, the ACC football schedule release for 2023 and 2020 through 2026. And again, got to give that league some credit for setting the model. Maybe that's one of the reasons the SEC hasn't put it out there yet, that they're going 3-6-6. They realize they weren't going to lead the way, so they're taking their time. Yeah, agreed with Troy. Dave Clawson, top 5 coach in the country, no doubt. Yeah, and this leads us to the next question, right, Trey? And we've done this to some degree on the program. So I would even change the way that Trey's phrasing it. He says, if they did this with Carolina, who do we want for our 3? I would say win. I'm hopeful that this is where the SEC will go, as opposed to the 1 permanent opponent and 7 rotating ones. I would much prefer to see this 3-6-6 deal for the consistency, right? For those historic rivalries in the SEC that they're just good for college football. And I'm talking about Alabama, Tennessee, Georgia, Auburn. Even you can get some, not the traditional Alabama and Auburn, not the traditional Jacksonville and Georgia. Even for South Carolina, like South Carolina not playing Florida or Tennessee, Georgia every year. That's why I put them as the 3. That's SEC football. That's been the SEC East for South Carolina. So I guess the question then you got to ask yourself, Trey, if you're doing that from a Gamecock perspective, is, all right, do you want it as far as what's going to be the easiest, what's going to give you the best chance to have the best season year after year? Because then it gets a little simpler, right? You probably want Mississippi State. You definitely want Vanderbilt. Traditionally, you've wanted Kentucky. I don't think that's where it is right now, but I don't know who else you're putting in there. Ole Miss, maybe? Pick your poison kind of thing. To me, I go simply from what feels like SEC football from the South Carolina perspective. Georgia, number 1. Florida, number 2. Tennessee, number 3. Those would be the 3 that I picked. Probably won't end up that way. I would imagine Kentucky probably gets in there. Missouri, Trey says. It says the reasonable triad would be Missouri, Tennessee, and Florida. I just have no desire to play Georgia each year. See, that's sad to me, man. Because even, through the years, for a long time, even this was before Georgia went to the next level. This was back in the Mark Richt era, or maybe even before, certainly before. I go back to the Quincy Carter days and a great win in 2000 and how special it was. But even those next several years, Georgia was contending for SEC East titles, I think. But still, South Carolina would play them close nearly every single year. It would be a close game. And the Gamecocks won their fair share of that matchup relatively often. And it would always be the gauge early in the season. Whoever ended up winning that game would go on to have a good season. And even if you didn't, it didn't necessarily mean you're going to have an awful season, but it was going to be really hard to have a really good season. Trey says that is the sad part of moving to Columbia in 2015. Ooh, that's bad timing. I thought I had bad timing finishing up Carolina in the 98-99 football seasons, 1-21, 21 losses in a row. So I feel your pain there, Trey. But I think that does say more about how you look at SEC football maybe than than anything else, the 3 rotating opponents you would put out there for your team, specifically South Carolina. Again, give me the surrounding states by and large. Sure, you want to go Vandy, Kentucky, and Mississippi State for strength of schedule or whatever. I get it. And I couldn't hold that against you. But think about the flip side of that. Like Troy says, I wish Clemson played Georgia every year like we did in the 80s. It was one of the best rivalries in the country back then. I think a lot of people wish that. Gamecock fans wish that so they could probably pull for Georgia to beat Clemson, and the rivals' record wouldn't be quite what it has been, maybe. But then Troy wouldn't have to put up with a bunch of Gamecock fans always railing on the schedule. And you'd get one more good college football game per year. And that, to me, is kind of what all of this comes down to. And why, again, I give the ACC credit because they probably can wrap it in the package that this is best for the fan and we did this for the fans. Well, no, they did it because it creates the best matchups on television and it makes your television package that much more attractive to get the big money. And I think that's ultimately why it will happen. Fortunately for us, that also equals more good college football games from the fan standpoint. So it's one of those rare instances that what is best for the bottom line is also best for the fan. And then everybody wins, right? Yeah, Trey's in on the Georgia-Clemson matchup every year. He just goes with the shot for Tater Tech and Clemson. Well played, sir. You guys keep it civil over there if you can. So that's part of the college football news. Other news coming out yesterday, if you're really into the recruiting, some commitment dates adjusted, I think, by a couple of Gamecock targets, including big-time state of Georgia quarterback Dylan Lonergan, who recently went to Stanford, I saw. I've seen Billy Napier getting some flack from Florida fans for not pulling down some big-time targets, including the quarterback who went over to Miami that we talked about yesterday, that On3 was reporting had an $11 million NIL offer from Florida. He turned that down and took $9.5 million to go to Miami, which, again, all reported. No evidence to support any of that. Yeah, Trey touched on that maybe right before you popped in, the Julian Bosnick news for Carolina baseball. Again, optics, man, not good at all. Bosnick, tremendous left-handed talent on the mound. And always a great guy to have in your program to some extent. I would say has underperformed and then dealt with the injury, so maybe not as fair as that could be, but just facts, right? But when you have Mark Kingston meeting with the media yesterday and doing it for the first time since finishing under 500 as a program, the first time that's happened this century, second time the program's missed the NCAA tournament. We just watched a College World Series that included half of the field from the SEC, and then the two other teams coming into the league soon in Texas and Oklahoma. So it ain't getting easier. And a big sigh from Trey, he says. Yeah. I think that's where a bunch of Gamecock fans are. And I put up the graphic yesterday that Gamecock baseball was 5th in the country in attendance, which kind of blew my mind. That's an unofficial stat, I think, from a Twitter handle out there. But just to show how important baseball is, and this has the feel, I'm not saying it's going to end up that way, but it has the feel of the end of the Will Muschamp era. And again, baseball and football, apples and oranges. Mark Kingston did not come in with Will Muschamp baggage. He just came in as a pretty much complete unknown, which happens a lot more in college baseball than it does in college football, but didn't have to overcome the baggage that Will Muschamp did, that Will Muschamp brought with him as the Gamecock football coach. But he's in that spot right now that unfortunately a lot of coaches get to. Frank Martin didn't quite get there in the same way because he had the unbelievable Final Four run at Carolina in basketball, which is still hard for me to wrap my head around. I saw it. I went there. I was there. It still boggles my mind. And then he also had, the national reputation, an Elite Eight run at Kansas State. So he brought with him a lot of proven track record in a way, but a style that was a lightning rod for sure, polarizing style. And I think it was the style combined with the lack of postseason appearances that ended up getting Gamecock basketball to where it was going into last year, where it was a do or die kind of year. But I don't know if any of us knew exactly what that was because Gamecock basketball traditionally just hadn't been that good. So I think a lot of people a bit surprised by the Gamecocks' decent season last year. They didn't make the postseason, but it wasn't a bad year compared to some bad years of Gamecock basketball for sure. It just wasn't good enough. And then it ended up being the end for Frank Martin, moving on to UMass now, which I think is a much better fit for him and his style and his personality. And I'll be shocked if he doesn't have a bunch of success there. But that's a much different feel, maybe just because of the enthusiasm, the tradition of the program. It's so much different in basketball than football for South Carolina and baseball, right? You got football 1 by a lot, baseball 2, then basketball 3. I'm sure some might argue that they're kind of 2A and 2B. Okay, but not in my lifetime. Not with the Omaha runs and the national championships and the SEC dominance there that Ray Tanner had. Not even close. But I mentioned the comparison with Mark Kingston and Will Muschamp, just simply it's that Cy thing Trey just touched on. It's I think most Gamecock fans want to be supportive of the program. They want to see the program do well, and yet you get to a point with a coach where you've seen enough mediocre to, I think, might be putting it kindly, you've seen enough bad to where it's really hard to build up optimism and believe that he is the person to move the program forward and to continue leading. That's certainly where Gamecock fans got with Will Muschamp. With the COVID considerations, the injury considerations, I get Mark Kingston returning for Gamecock baseball, but any kind of comments I read, any kind of conversations I have with Gamecock fans leads, I think, maybe the most optimistic of them are, and a lot of them have gone over the edge on the other side, unfortunately, for Gamecock baseball. So it's going to be a wildly interesting year for Carolina moving to 2023, and a difficult situation for Mark Kingston because it's already really difficult at South Carolina when you're the head coach from an expectation standpoint. Now, you have a lot of built-in advantages. You're going to get some really good players. But if you're not one of the best teams in the country, fans aren't happy. Very simple. The margin for error from the fan standpoint has not grown or has not shrunk, let's say. I don't know. How does that go? There is There's been no more leeway given in conjunction with how college baseball, I think it has grown more difficult, where the margin of error has shrunk. When we saw it at Mississippi State this year, right? National championship year before, last in your league the next year. And Trey says, exactly, hard to renew my season tickets in the name of mediocrity. That was, I think, why a lot of people were a bit surprised that Mark Kingston is back for another year. It's what would have made a bunch of sense in my mind, mathematically, that, yeah, you have to eat a contract buyout, and that's a big hit on the books. But also, you're going to generate, presumably, if you make a popular hire, you're going to generate a bunch of revenue as well, just based off of change. Not necessarily, I mean, knowing that doesn't guarantee anything, but it does guarantee a renewed enthusiasm, typically, in a fan base, if you get the right guy, right? Just look at Clemson. Plenty of optimism moving forward, and reasons for optimism with the hire they made. Went out and doubled what they paid, basically, their baseball coach, a proven entity, and a guy that coached in the national championship series in Eric Bakich at Michigan, a guy with Clemson ties. I mean, you couldn't have drawn it up much better. And that's why I said home run, grand slam hire. And Troy now taking the shot back after Trey went with Tater Tech and says that describes South Carolina football for 125 years. Mediocrity, he's saying. Well, Troy wasn't saying that, 12-ish years ago, 10 years ago? That is the one stretch, right? 3 straight top 10 seasons. Impressive back and forth there, gentlemen. So speaking of baseball, and we'll continue to talk Gamecock baseball and exactly what Mark Kingston said yesterday and how it's being heard, I think. But the overriding baseball story yesterday was one that I have not seen, I don't think, ever in this way. And we talked about Freddie Freeman's emotional weekend. And then the reports came out yesterday that he had fired his agent, and the release he put out was that his representation is a fluid situation. Never seen that before. Like, I don't get it. Either you're firing them or you're not. I guess maybe he's reevaluating, he's saying, but seems to be, this helps me understand the situation that much more, because it was a unique scene. We talked about it a bunch on Monday. I'm a Braves guy, right? Dale Murphy was my guy growing up, my guy. And that's how I evaluate Braves fans. You grew up in the Dale Murphy days, the Bob Horner days, Claudell Washington, then you are, in my mind, you're a true Braves fan because you saw them and they were bad. And that's not how you were, not what you were attracted to as a fan, right? I loved the fact that I could see them play nearly every day, and they were the closest team to where I grew up. So there's the regional thing to go with it. Dale Murphy was an amazing example, an amazing human being, really easy guy to pull for. And loyalty is important as a fan, in my mind. The results, you don't just jump on the bandwagon and go with that. So been a Braves guy forever. And then obviously the ridiculous run ended up coming. And I guess maybe I've seen there is that jealousy feeling, I think it is, or I don't know what it is exactly. Like, hey, if you join the Braves bandwagon when Tom Glavine and John Smoltz came along, then you didn't suffer like the rest of us and see a bunch of losses. You didn't earn being a Braves fan. Maybe there's some of that in there. But Freddie Freeman was the next generation, right? He was the guy who took it over from Chipper Jones, right? To me, in my head, in my Braves lifetime, well, there's probably, if I try to backtrack it and do it historically, Hank Aaron, and then there's probably someone who bridged the gap between Hank Aaron and Dale Murphy. But again, before my time. So that's how I see it. You got the legendary Braves and Hank Aaron. What he represents is kind of everything before my lifetime. Then it's Dale Murphy. Then it's Chipper Jones. Then it's Freddie Freeman. That's how it goes in my head as far as face of the franchise. And I know Maddox and Glavine and Smoltz were amazing. And maybe you make the argument it was Dale Murphy to John Smoltz and then Chipper Jones. Maybe that would make more sense, but that's just how I see it, right? Dale Murphy, Chipper Jones, Freddie Freeman. Those are the three guys in my lifetime. And Dale Murphy didn't end up a Brave at the end of his career. Went to the Philadelphia Phillies. Chipper Jones did. Lifetime Brave guy. And a rarity in sports. Beloved. Always will be from a Braves baseball perspective. Freddie Freeman, it looked like he was going to be the guy, especially after winning a World Series where he was in his career. Braves fans, Braves players, Braves front office wanted him. He said he wanted to be a Brave. Got drafted by them, had always been in the franchise. It had worked out great. But then negotiations came. And we learned a lot more, at least I learned a lot more yesterday, I think, about the emotions tied to Freddie Freeman's return to Atlanta. Because I just assumed that Freddie was kind of talking out of both sides of his mouth. Like, I want to be a Brave. I appreciate it all. But then when a better offer came along, he jumped at it. And knowing that he's from California originally, hey man, you can't knock a guy. The show's called Unrestricted Free Agent, right? I value loyalty, but loyalty to a certain degree is stupidity. And can definitely appreciate everything a guy represented and brought to a team, but I understand Freddie Freeman was kind of on the 32 years old, the backside of his career. What he represented was a major investment, and a lot of times you don't want to pay the old guy. You don't want to get caught up with that and not have a bunch of flexibility to make other moves. So from a franchise standpoint, I understood the position the Braves were in. I get it. The Dodgers are just in a kind of a different tax bracket in the league. It made sense. Wished him well. Move on. But then to see all the tears, all the emotion over the weekend, it didn't quite make sense to me on the surface. Like, it was a lot. But now hearing some of this backstory, got it. The way that I understand the story is through his agent. He talked to the Braves. They put a deal out there. I think it's something like 5 years for $135 million. Not quite the number that Freeman's camp was looking for. They counter with maybe a longer number of years and a higher number. And the Braves come back with, I think they up it for $5 million total, 5 years for $140 million. And Freddie Freeman's camp, the agent, comes back and says, no, that's not quite good enough. And the Braves perceive that as, all right, well, that was our best deal. And you said no, so we got to move on. And the way that I read the story is Freddie Freeman assumed that was hey, we're not going to accept this right now. We're going to go out and look and see what else is out there. As opposed to, it ain't going to work out. That's how the Braves took it. And so they made the move for Matt Olson. And that is something that Freddie did not see coming at that point in the negotiations. And again, when you're the athlete, You're the guy. It's on you. I only have so much empathy for someone who blames his agent in this situation, especially a veteran guy like Freeman, who's been around a long time and the whole thing. Like your agent is representing you. So if he screws up, it's because of what you told him to do, right? You can't just blame him. It's much more. It's much easier for me to understand that when we're talking about really inexperienced guys in the process or in their career early on. You get a super agent representing you in the Major League Baseball draft, right? In the first round, you're Kumar Rocker, and you don't end up signing. And, well, I can get that. I can feel a lot worse for that player than I can for a seasoned guy who should absolutely have covered his bases and not put himself in any kind of compromising position. Been as clear as possible with everybody. And the reports are that Freeman was mad at his agents, was thinking they misrepresented him to a certain degree. And the more that he's talked to the other side in Atlanta, the more he has gotten kind of the full story, and the more I think he has come to blame his agent. And that's why the reports are out there that he's fired his agent and he's going to move on in a different direction. And I guess from that standpoint, knowing all of that, I can factor in some regret in that emotion that we saw over the weekend. Some maybe personal responsibility, feeling like he screwed it up, right? Which would, I think, which helps explain to me why all the emotion was there. If you feel some personal regret and responsibility that the negotiations could have gone another way had you been clearer with your agent, clearer with the team, whatever, and there is some regret there. And so now it was Clayton Kershaw saying, I hope the Dodgers aren't second fiddle as part of this thing. And there's the picture going around on social media you guys might have seen of Freddie by himself on the dugout and everybody else in the Dodgers dugout up on the railing. And it was just all the attention and all the emotion on Freddie Freeman over the weekend that just made it such a unique situation. But getting this backstory, getting these details out there helps me understand it a lot more. And also, now I think there has to be that much of a line drawn for Freddie Freeman moving forward that, okay, that was the last chapter, and his comments now have reflected that. Like, yep, that was closure, and now we're moving on. And now it's about the Dodgers. And it's interesting to hear him say, I guess he signed a 6-year deal there. No, this is my team for the next 6 years. So that's where my focus is in the whole deal. Almost like just a hired hand, right? 6 years, almost. When you say something like that, it's almost like a sentence to me. I hear like you've been sentenced to 6 years with this team, like that. If that's how you're going to see it, that's. I mean, it is the length of the contract, so I get why he puts it out there that way. But when I hear that, I just, you never hear that positively in a lot of ways. Like, oh, I get 6 great years with this franchise. Like if you think they're going to be great, then why would you say it's going to stop after 6 years, right? And Freddie is 32 years old, so maybe he just sees like that'll be the end of his career, or maybe he's trying to show that he has a long-term commitment to the team. I get that, but I can't help but the other part of it, my brain thinking, interesting. Speaking of my brain working in that way, another Live Series presser yesterday. Matthew Wolff, the headliner at 23 years old, joining the Live Series, the latest guy to jump ship for the PGA Tour. The guys on stage, though, yesterday, getting all the TV time and the headlines, Brooks Koepka being the star of that, Patrick Reed being very much second fiddle, and then Pat Perez, the three guys that I saw up at the podium yesterday. And kudos to Pat Perez for finally saying what everyone has been saying about these guys who've jumped to the Live Series. They were asked, as all of them were asked, about how they felt, their feelings, the perception that being paid by Saudi Arabians who were connected to the 9/11 attacks, connected to killing a journalist, connecting to poor human rights, to a poor human rights record, I think is the best way to put that, right? How do you feel about that? Or do you feel some responsibility on the other side of that? And Pat Perez is like, no, we play golf. This is a good situation for us to play golf. And that was it. And maybe that's seen as callous or whatever, but I appreciated it, especially from Pat Perez's standpoint, right? Not anywhere close to an A name in golf. Got a really interesting backstory. I think I read a story on him in Sports Illustrated one time, and just he's always been kind of outspoken, but that's the truth for a bunch of these guys, but have been unwilling to say it. And Bryson DeChambeau, I guess, was part of a press conference as well. I didn't see any of his comments, read some of them, just talking about growing the game. I think that's the PR prescribed line to give when talking about your rationale. Dustin Johnson's camp went with, it was an opportunity my family couldn't pass up, which we all translate to, it was just too much money. But the grow the game stuff is ridiculous, right? But it would make sense that Bryson DeChambeau would go that way and try to and mention that he's going to give a lot of money to charity and do that. Again, nothing wrong with giving money to charity. Nothing wrong with the idea of growing the game of golf, but this ain't that. Stop it. We all know. And Pat Perez, thank you for saying it. And I hope more people who make public comments in 2022 understand how easy it is to see through PC or PR driven statements. They just don't work nearly as much as they did. You can't get away with it nearly as much as you could. So Matthew Wolff, though, the headliner, just because of where he is in his career. Brooks Koepka saying he needs more time to recover and play less events, and the whole thing, injuries have been a big deal. That's absolutely true. When you're 23, and he was, unfortunately, Matthew Wolff, I saw the snarky, the plight of the 23-year-old golfer, just talking about being able to play less, spend more time with his girlfriend. When he visits his swing coach who's out in California, it can be a grind and the whole thing. Yeah, nobody feels bad for the millionaire golfers at the age of 23, especially. But that's his reality, right? So I get him trying to connect with people with his life and trying to show them how it's going to be improved and that this offer is better for him. I get that. But that's when keeping it real goes wrong, right? So I want less PC and PR polished statements out there, but then you also got to understand how you're coming off. You can't be tone deaf completely. And that's the thing. If had Pat Perez been Dustin Johnson or Phil Mickelson, you can't get away with saying it exactly how he said it when he would have said it at the front of this thing, right? Or maybe you could if you had a certain personality, if you have the Pat Perez personality. That's the thing. Like Charles Barkley can get away with saying so much more than nearly anybody else ever, just because he's Charles Barkley. That's what he does. I guess there's certain personalities. Terry Chick, I worked with at WOLO for a little while. He was kind of that guy. He was just going to say certain things that other people weren't going to say. But that's who he was. That's who Charles Barkley is. That's who Pat Perez is. So maybe he could have gotten away with saying it. But yeah, that's a tough spot, I think, to be from a PR standpoint. When you're 23 years old, you just made the move from the PGA Tour to the Live Series, making a ton of money, and then trying to explain it as you had a grind, the PGA Tour grind, so much more elevated compared to, for the way that you golf fans hear it, compared to any kind of other grind out there. So interesting side note there, and interesting that we're going to get the first American event in Portland this week, and that gets going tomorrow. The numbers from this thing will be interesting if we ever get to see them. How many eyeballs, how many golf fans actually go seek out the Live Series, and then I guess for long term sustainability, right? How much people actually will care about what goes on the non PGA Tour events, the Live Series. But I mean, you couldn't have generated much more headlines, and just the latest to get a guy who's certainly up and coming and had a bright future on the PGA Tour, and is just different than a bunch of those other guys who are on the backside of their careers, is now willing to put it all out there, basically risk it all for a big time payday. That's where Matthew Wolff is. That's what Bryson DeChambeau, Patrick Reed have done as well. They're a little bit different, having won majors already. But it sounds to me, at least from Patrick Reed's comments, that he fully expects to be able to play at the Masters, being a past champion. And I think these guys think they have enough value to the majors that they're going to continue to be able to play in them outside of belonging to the PGA Tour. I don't know if they would have made the move otherwise. I would think it's that important to them, but maybe not. Maybe the money, the offer gets to a certain point where you can be like, hey, let's roll the dice here. Let's do it. Or maybe Phil Mickelson had a meeting with everyone and said, hey, if enough of us do this, there's no way they're going to keep us all out. Who knows? I could see that happening. And there is a part of me that certainly respects that. Any kind of breaking up a monopoly or going up against a big time powerful entity. The PGA Tour that used to have the PGA Tour China version, by the way. So what they're selling is the pure version of golf and the whole thing. Come on. I think most of us are savvy enough to understand. You get that pitch, right? I get it. And that's certainly what you want to portray. And I love everything that Jack Nicklaus and Arnold Palmer built up, and everything that the tradition of golf and the whole thing. But let's not kid ourselves. Let's not make it out to be some completely altruistic endeavor. Like Pat Perez is right. They just hit a golf ball. That's what they do. They play golf and get paid. And the best place to have done that, the only real place to do that, the PGA Tour, big leagues. It's the only big leagues. And now there's trying to be a competing big league. And tough for me to blame a bunch of guys for making the move over there. At least test it out. Especially knowing the PGA Tour had plenty of chances to adjust what they were doing and to give players more of what they were hoping to get in some guaranteed purses or less time involved dedicated to that PGA Tour thing. So I understand it from both perspectives, and going to be really interesting to see how it continues to play out, but how it ends up playing out further and further down the line. So all part of where we are here at the end of June as we roll into hour number 2 of the program. Really appreciate all you guys joining us. Teddy D here in on that. Ultimately, this edition of the Live Series is good for the golfers. The players that go aren't the bad guys, and the players that stay aren't the good guys. I'm enjoying watching this play out. And I think Teddy D's right on, even though it gets played out like that in the media, right? Justin Thomas and Rory McIlroy, Colin Morikawa, I think the guys kind of in the spotlight maybe on the John Rahm. One of his comments got a lot of play. Not jumping for the money. We're all about the legacy. We value what the PGA Tour has meant to us and what it means, and we're loyal and the whole thing. And those other guys, good luck. We're not going to miss them, kind of thing. And on the other side, now I got Pat Perez at the top. Like, no, we're just golfers. We're playing for money. Good for him. It's the Bryson DeChambeaus, the Patrick Reeds, the Phil Mickelsons that still want everyone to like them or aren't willing to go out there and say it quite as plainly. I think Dustin Johnson is maybe right below Pat Perez by saying, yeah, this opportunity couldn't turn down. Money's too good. But agreed, ultimately better for golfers out there because the PGA Tour has to adjust what it didn't feel like it had to adjust. It's the way it's always done. This is how we run it. This is how we can run it because we're the guys. We're the top dogs. We're the only one. It's the only show in town. And I don't think they ever thought it would get to this point. And they underestimated the lure of a ridiculous amount of money to guys who played golf for money. I think they miscalculated a little bit there. So as we start hour number 2 here, right here in the middle of the week, we'll get back into a football discussion for sure. Wanted to let you hear a quick take. We talked about the ACC switching to the 3-5-5 model, the possibility of the SEC going to 3-6-6. Wanted to let you hear from the Gamecock assistant G.A. Mangus's take on playing 9 conference games, the possibility of making that move, which coaches for the most part, outside of Nick Saban and Kirby Smart, have been reluctant to embrace just because it was going to make life more difficult. That's certainly not how GA saw it and sees it, for sure. More from GA Mangus right here.
I never got any joy beating somebody's ass by 50 points and giving them a paycheck, just to come get a W. I think that's ridiculous. There's a lot more joy, and if you're a competitor, I'd much rather play, like our 2-year rotation. Everybody was complaining, oh man, South Carolina's got Alabama coming up. Well, we gave them a tussle and Tuscaloosa, and then the next year we beat them and beat the hell out of them in Columbia. And that was a lot more fun than playing Kisky crap.
How about that, huh? Strong statement for sure. GA is someone who's not afraid to speak his opinion and get his thoughts and perspectives out there in the world. And that's one of the reasons why I'm here as well. And one of the reasons why I wanted to introduce you guys to a new partner here on the program, Freedom Primary Care. If you're looking for a place that considers you to be in charge of your health care, that's what Freedom Primary Care is all about. And also a place that will give you some options when it comes to being in charge of your health care. Freedom Primary Care. You can check them out and see on the bottom of the scroll here, if you're checking out the video portion of the show, 803-627-2447 right now in Fort Mill, not too far from where I live, but Freedom Primary Care, integrative care. So they're going to give you plenty of options one way or the other. If you're more traditional, more conservative in your approach to healthcare, they'll give you those options. If you're more progressive or natural minded,
and they'll give you those options as well. And the options is what I appreciate almost as much as the freedom part of the freedom primary care there, because obviously freedom means a little bit more to me as I sit here with you today than it has starting 8 months ago in my life previously. And a freedom primary care right there in lockstep with me and how I look at things, being in charge of your health, not being told you have to do something, is a fundamental right in my mind. That's how freedom primary care sees it as well. So if that's something that's ultimately important to you, maybe you've been in situations with you and your family where that hasn't been how you've been treated in the past by your primary care doctor or any other healthcare situation out there, I recommend you go check out Freedom Primary Care. Again, the phone number to give them a call, 803-627-2447, based in Fort Mill, but telemedicine options out there in the 21st century. You certainly don't have to run around the corner to your doctor. You can get all kinds of options, and Freedom Primary Care is one of them. Appreciate them sponsoring the program, 803-627-2447. And a new portion of the show. Good to get them on board with Freedom Primary Care. Appreciate you being on board as well as we get hour number 2 going. Anthony continues the golf discussion saying the PGA Tour equals WWE entertainment. The Live Tour is AEW wrestling. The little guy that's trying to stick it to the man. And Teddy says, oh, I'm an old WCW fan. Maybe that compares to the European Tour. The wrestling analogies are strong this morning with the golf, and I think that's very fair. So if we keep that going, all right, because which one was, where are the Von Erichs? You guys remember that? I mean, that was the old days of ESPN, and Colette says she's going to check out Freedom Primary Care. Well done. Good for you, man. The Von Erich, I think it was like East Coast Wrestling. Maybe it wasn't. I forget. I don't know. It was so at the beginning of the ESPN days where it wasn't NWA, Troy says. Yeah, it was much lower than that, I feel like. Like NWA, I remember being the Four Horsemen and Ric Flair and a legit deal. I was much more of an NWA guy than a WWF guy. I think maybe because my parents didn't really let me watch wrestling. I had to always watch it at my grandparents. And I think WWF, before it was WWE, was on Saturdays. And so it just wasn't really allowed at my house. But I could sneak in maybe a Monday night edition of NWA, or maybe if I was I don't know, maybe it was just on more often than the WWF that I remember. So let's get some golfer analogies going. I saw yesterday that Brooks Koepka was going full on evil villain in a lot of ways. The evil wrestler, always the best. Troy says I was an NWA, WCW guy also. So keeping that in mind, who's like the ultimate evil wrestler character? To me, that was Ric Flair growing up. He was the guy. He was the greatest heel. And I think he switched over at some point and became good. Or, I mean, the feather boa around the neck is how I remember him, or the whole robe and to be the man, you got to beat the man, and the whole shtick, right? To me, he was the embodiment of the evil wrestler, and it was Hulk Hogan, even though he's WWE, that was representing the good side. That's how I kind of separated in my mind. What about you guys? Certainly being more wrestling aficionados, I think, than I am. I think I got to the point where really serious into, how should I change that? Where sports became more of a serious commitment about like 11
All right, how about that? I think we got back in there. Thanks for hanging with the technical issues. It's all part of the digital show. Sometimes that happens. Abdullah the Butcher was the scariest to me. I think that was before my time, or I just too dumb to remember Abdullah the Butcher. I do remember who were the Iron Sheik, another bad guy back in the day. And actually, well done, Anthony. The Von Erichs wrestling in the WC. You got to tell me if you look that up. And okay, Abdullah the Butcher was in the 70s. Thank you, Troy. That makes me feel a little bit better. But right now, if we have Hulk Hogan representing golf as the utmost good guy, who's that in golf? Is that Rory? I saw a picture of Rory wearing somebody going after him. He was wearing, I forget it, I think it was some kind of resort that was Saudi backed. And he was their spokesman from like 07 to 2012. So you got to be careful how you play this thing, right? Especially with the internet out there. To me, it can't quite be Rory because he's not like Captain American-ish, even though his reputation really got. It's not quite Justin Thomas, right? He doesn't quite play that role, is it? John Rahm, another guy who can't be kind of the embodiment of American values like Hulk Hogan was, for sure. Oh, I love the personal story here. Teddy D says, my dad took me to Starcade 85 at the old Omni in Atlanta. The Great Kabuki was there. The American Dream, Dusty Rhodes, and Ric Flair, to name a few. Oh, well done. I would have been 7 then. Good for you, Anthony. Me and the little girl are always watching wrestling, Tim. Got to raise them right. I'm just imagining. Because, see, maybe it's because I got 3 boys at home, and that's enough. That is more than enough for my wife to put up with most of the time, being the only female in a household of 5. And I'm just imagining she comes in the family room, and it's me and the 3 boys just watching wrestling. I think that would just be too much. I mean, a lot of times we're watching baseball or football or whatever, and that's probably too much too. But I think wrestling would just put, no pun intended, that would be putting us at the top rope there, or over the top. So if we keep going the wrestling and out, like Jimmy Superfly Snuka, I was a big fan of. Right? No, I think he was WWF. Yeah, so I did get some crossover there, right? I know I'm trying to say that I came to wrestling like the WCCW, World Class Championship Wrestling with the Von Erichs on ESPN. I was like, oh, what's this all about? Oh, I guess this is a sport. Oh, the claw is a thing? Cool. And that led me, I think, to the NWA or WCW, whatever it was at the time, that other one, right? And then found WWF after that, and that was Coco Beware. Oh, there's some names I hadn't said in a long, long time. And then I was a big Rock and Roll Express guy. That was the WCW or NWA deal, right? Those were my guys. I think I got some bracelets on because of them, or the little rope bracelets, or the whole thing. I think I saw too where they were still wrestling as of relatively recently, and I didn't know. Anthony, come on, man. Now that you're of a certain age, don't you just feel bad for encouraging that or supporting it? Like watching The Wrestler, that movie, was really, really sad, but the real life version of that was the 30 for 30 I saw of Ric Flair, right? I mean, that's one of the saddest things I've ever seen. The wife and I are finishing up the This Is Us, and I know that's a really kind of a female driven drama. So I knew I had watched something sad recently, and so we're on the second. We watched the second to last episode last night, and so this is if you never saw it before, just to give you a point of reference, it's about a family, and it's through different generations, and now the complete series is wrapping up, and the dramatic finale is the mom of the show dying. This is, I'm not giving, not spoiler alert here, because they kind of lead up to this in a bunch of different episodes, but it's like, oh, people going and saying their goodbyes and the whole thing, and it's pretty intense. I think it's really well done. And Anthony says, yeah, it was too sad, man, no doubt. But that's one of the reasons why I can't get on board with still being a wrestling fan, or I can't ignore that. It's too much. It's like if everyone in football had concussion issues, if I knew everyone in football had, obviously there are examples out there and terrible endings, right? For way too many guys, but the percentage isn't overwhelmingly high. Like Troy Aikman had a bunch of concussions. He comes out and is like, I'm fine. So I never want to whitewash it and say that clearly playing football leads to automatically having health issues at the end. It certainly has for a lot of people, and unfortunately, and it's really sad, but because the percentage isn't at a really high level, then I can rationalize it in my head. Like, hey, I can still be a football fan. It's their choice, and it's how they choose to live their life. And I don't feel like I'm contributing overwhelmingly to something that is, purely detrimental, as opposed to the wrestling thing with, maybe too, it was seeing the sad end for Del Wilkes not too long ago, and knowing his story that led him to prison time and the whole deal. Like, there's a lot of rough stuff that is attached to wrestling in real life as opposed to the show. And so I just can't quite get there. Was happy that the taking sports seriously kind of trumped it back in the day, and maybe because my parents steered me away from there too. But hey, you guys still get in there and can go the suspension of disbelief and say, hey, this is for entertainment and the whole thing. I get it. Maybe who would be the Dusty Rhodes, the American Dream right now? Because it's another American guy that would have, maybe that could be Justin Thomas, because he does have a personality. He'll have some fun there. Maybe Colin Morikawa, you put him in there. I don't know. So it doesn't quite translate in my head, or maybe I'm just not a big enough wrestling fan to make those full analogies. Anthony says, my little girl was fascinated when she found out that girls wrestle as well. Took her to a live event. She met her favorite, Sasha Banks. She's been locked in ever since. Good for her. I guess my question would be, is there going to be a point where you're going to hope that she gets unattached? I'm guessing maybe not. So wanted to get back into a football discussion with you guys. Sorry, the Live series definitely does always, you guys know, if you watch the show on a consistent basis, it takes us down a path. And again, it's because it's so monumental in sports in so many ways. We've never seen this kind of money involved, with professional athletes being plucked from the traditional major series, right? We know, like the USFL tried back in the day. XFL has tried. We've seen it in football. We just never seen it on the major stage in America like this. Yeah, Pat Perez, like Roddy Piper. I could see that, especially after yesterday when he just said, yeah, man, no, I don't have any problem with it. I don't have a problem taking this money because I play golf for money. That's what I do. Jason says watching wrestling is like a live action comic book, colorful characters, good versus evil. Exactly. No doubt. And wait, does that mean that you have to be a comic book guy if you're going to be a wrestling fan or vice versa? Because that's another thing that I've never really quite gotten into. All this Marvel stuff recently and all those movies, and nope. I know that's been the trend. I just never quite got into that. Like I was okay, Spider-Man or Batman or Superman, okay, but I never really read the comics and never was too into that back in the day. The football conversation I want to get into. So from a news perspective, if you're really into recruiting, a couple of recruits out there that the Gamecocks they are high with, I think, are maybe even counting on to join the class of 2023, moved their commit dates back. And I don't know exactly what that means. I would think, just from a completely unexpert outside looking in opinion, if you seem to be on the inside track to sign a guy and he pushes the signing date back, I would think that's not good news for you. But again, take that for what it's worth. July 5th was the date for Dylan Lonergan, big-time quarterback out of the state of Georgia. Now he's pushed it back a week to July 12th. I think another player was going to do it June 30th. Maybe the other guy down in Jacksonville, I think, was supposed to do it yesterday, and now he's pushed it back as well. I don't have the details there. I'm not your guy for that. Just wanted to mention that as the news that I saw pop up yesterday from Gamecock football. One opinion piece that's out there. And I think it's really easy to get it confused, I guess, or to take it for more than it's worth. This is one man's opinion. Barrett Sallee is a qualified opinion, but what I really appreciate about Barrett, who's covered college football for a long time, now does it for CBSSports.com. He put out an accountability article, and I think he pinned it on his Twitter bio, where he's the only guy I've ever seen do this, actually. Maybe there are some other guys out there, but he says he does it every year. He goes back and holds himself accountable for the opinions that he was putting out there preseason after the season's over. So one thing at the top of this article I was reading in his accountability article was that he said LSU would win the SEC West last year, and clearly was wrong about that. And I appreciate someone holding themselves accountable, actually being responsible for everything they talked about this time of year in the old talking season that he references, I think, at the top of his article, because that's the worst, the absolute worst. I mean, we all hate that in life, right? When people just run off at the mouth and aren't responsible for what they have to say. We hold politicians the most accountable for that, right? Rightly so, I think. And they can be the absolute worst at not being accountable for that. But I think probably sports hot takers are way up there too, right? Always just reminding you when they got something right, which can be one out of however many times, and they don't mention any of those other times. Or if they do, they say, well, I was saying this because, and it was really close. And come on, man. So I appreciate Barrett Sallee being accountable for his takes. So keep that in mind as I'll go through this. South Carolina, I've got the headline up, the 10th ranked strength of schedule in the SEC, according to Barrett Sallee of CBSSports.com, in the strength of schedule, which I think we've seen South Carolina within the top 10 in the country so many times that maybe this is kind of old hat, or it's even like the idea of ranking them via conference is different to me than, just strength of schedule in the country, where the Gamecocks have been up amongst the top 2 or 3 in the last several years, maybe not the last couple of years, but certainly in the Will Muschamp era. And I think really the point of this article, maybe the genesis of this, and maybe he does it every single year, I don't know, but the big takeaway from this is that Brian Harsin might not be at Auburn very much longer. And that's not a hot take out of nowhere after the dumpster fire that Auburn was last year, and Gamecock fans got to see it. I saw it up close and personal, my own two eyes at Williams-Brice last year. Dumpster fire. And Brian Harsin was a curious hire to me originally. And then you bring Mike Bobo in, and you bring in Vanderbilt's former head coach as your defensive guy. And yeah, I thought those were really good hires and going to kind of solidify, be the experience that you needed for a guy coming in from Boise State. But whew, that was a rough first year. And Auburn is the place in the country where you don't want to have a rough first year. You don't want to have a rough first year anywhere, but you especially don't want to have one at Auburn, because you might not make it through year number 2. And this is exactly the case right now. It ends the little blurb about Auburn and why they're the number 1 strength of schedule. Well, first of all, they got to play Georgia and Alabama on the road. At a conference game in week 3 against Penn State. Don't get a bye until week 8. Road game at Ole Miss between the road trip to Georgia and the bye. And the last sentence, simply put, if Harsin stays employed, it'll be one of the most miraculous coaching jobs in recent memory. A little hyperbolic. But that's what the college football discussion is so often this time of year. So Auburn's at number 1, Vanderbilt's at number 2. They got an out-of-conference game against Wake. And then at Hawaii in week 0, they played the defending MAC champ at Northern Illinois, too. Whew. If Clark Lee leads them to a bowl game this year, or even 4 wins, it'll be nothing short of a miracle, Salih says. Again, CBSSports.com ranking the strength of schedule for the SEC teams. The Gamecocks at 10th. We'll get there. Wanted to give you a little bit more here. Arkansas is 3. They open with Cincinnati. A good note for the Gamecocks, who play Arkansas in week 2. So that'll be a massive game for them. I think Carolina fans would love for Arkansas to beat Cincinnati, right? And then they can be feeling good about themselves when that 11 a.m. Central Time game kicks off in week 2 in Fayetteville. They're going to BYU in October. And then the home schedule has Alabama, LSU, and Ole Miss. At Arkansas, neutral site game, A&M. Part of Arkansas' schedule. Why they're up at number 3. Tennessee is 4. Going at Pittsburgh out of conference in week 2. One of the highlights there, Mississippi State is 5. LSU 6, Florida 7, Texas A&M 8, Alabama 9, and the Gamecocks at 10th from a strength of schedule standpoint in the SEC. They point out being at Arkansas in week 2. Then turn around and you get the home game against Georgia. Road games 3 out of the last 4. At Clemson to finish, like always. But the good news, they say the Texas A&M and Tennessee game will be at Williams-Brice Stadium. So to me, I don't see a ton of reasons why they would be down the list strength of schedule wise. It's certainly not going to be easy. It never is for Gamecock football. But at least according to this college football writer's opinion, it is not overwhelmingly against all odds difficult this year for the Gamecocks like it's been in years past. And the non-conference, I think, a big reason for that, right? Coastal Carolina, South Carolina State. I mean, I shouldn't say coastal, right? Charlotte is who I'm thinking of. And then you got Georgia State to start. So those 3 games being on the schedule, I think, really help. You don't have the marquee non-conference game this year like you've had in years past. And then I've seen other people go out and predict that this will be the year that the Texas A&M streak, the winless streak, is snapped by by South Carolina. One of the things that Salih gave himself a bunch of credit for was not believing Texas A&M hype this time last year. He said they posed no threat to Alabama in the SEC West, and then clearly they posed the direct threat to them by beating them specifically, but losing 4 other games. Never really threatened for the SEC West crown. So take it for what it's worth, but it's interesting to me to always gauge a more national or regional take on the Gamecock specifically. I also saw, I think, 10 SEC teams and their odds of winning the SEC, and South Carolina didn't even make the list yesterday, or didn't even make the graphic on social media that I saw put out that Alabama's still the Vegas favorite to win the conference. Georgia is next, the next lowest odds, but not even predicted to win the thing this year. And then Tennessee was pretty high up on the list. That was the one that really stood out to me. I think the 4th best odds to win the SEC this year, which I get it, man. Josh Heupel did a great job in year 1, but Tennessee still went 7-6. And I know this about the SEC. You can stay ahead offensively in the conference, but you can't keep staying ahead by doing the same things without supreme talent coming in year after year after year. So I'm talking about Alabama, supreme talent, right? And I mean, you can certainly make the adjustment that with all the offensive coordinators they've had in there, the way that offense has adapted to modern college football, that it certainly hasn't been one recipe for success there. The recipe has been adapt, get really, really good players, and you can keep dominating the league. But Alabama's the only one, right? Georgia offensively, I would argue, certainly hasn't been known to be a juggernaut through the years and just absolutely smash people the way Alabama has. Oh, they're really, really good, but I think a lot of times they've been in their own way a little bit like LSU was for years with Les Miles, where they'd have amazing players but not be able to utilize them as well as they should. We saw Joe Brady come in and do it for a year and then jump to the NFL along with Joe Burrow, and then we saw LSU come crashing back down to reality. I think there are just more examples out there of teams who have done it in spurts. Urban Meyer is another good example back in the day of being able to consistently be really good on offense in the SEC, but also having supreme talent with him. Tim Tebow leading the way, Percy Harvin, those guys. So I get that Josh Heupel came into the league, and you got to give him a ton of credit. I didn't see that happening. I saw a Central Florida athletic director hiring a Central Florida head coach at a program that was actually trending in the wrong direction at Central Florida. I mean, it was going to be difficult to trend positively after taking over for a coach who went undefeated. But I'm just not convinced. I see Tennessee optimism right now a lot like I saw Texas A&M optimism, or I think maybe more aptly a lot like Barrett Salih saw it last year, that, hey, yeah, they were coming off a really good year, but wait a second. That what they have coming back and what their schedule is, that doesn't add up to another really, really good year. Now, it will remain to be seen, and maybe this is just kind of an anti-Tennessee bias, them having been so good growing up in the 80s, and then Peyton Manning adding to that in the 90s, and then he graduates, and then T. Martin and company win the national championship. And speaking of that, I wanted to touch on a little social media clip I saw yesterday that made me think, that made me, I think, again, understand or add another level to why it didn't work out for Will Muschamp and company at South Carolina. So this was a social media clip put out by Notre Dame football. And it looked like relatively recently, I have no idea when, Peyton Manning and Eli Manning were speaking to the team. And it was really interesting to hear them talk. I think the clip's like a minute and a half or something. It's not very long. And it's nothing that I haven't heard before philosophically, but maybe the examples they gave or how they said it specifically just resonated with me. It struck a chord. And again, I'll maybe always be searching for the right words to describe why certain coaches don't work out at certain places. Why, especially like I will forever be trying to explain, to try to figure out in my head why we would see a Frank Martin coach South Carolina team be one of the best teams in the SEC one night and then one of the worst 2 nights later or 3 nights later. Like that one, the Gamecock basketball the last several years has been so difficult. I mean, you can go back to the Final Four run too. So difficult to anticipate what you're going to see, to explain, to figure out, to be attached to in any kind of emotional way, right? You go so up and down. So maybe that's one of the reasons why I will always, or how I will always apply what I'm hearing when really successful coaches, players, whatever, are talking about what leads to success. And then kind of the opposite of that is where my brain goes to try to figure out, okay, maybe that's why there wasn't sustained success with program X, right? But this automatically happened last night. Peyton Manning is up first on the social media clip talking about how when your best players are your best workers, work the hardest. They're the guys that are taking the notes and sitting up front. And this is something that Steve Spurrier always said. He would say it a little plainer, right? When your best players are your leaders, then you're going to have good teams. And this is basically what Peyton Manning was saying. But it was Eli who kind of crystallized it that much more to me. And it's something that I think is also being expressed by Shane Beamer, and the philosophy that we just saw contributed to in that video that we played yesterday, the commit video by Pup Howard, talking about how he feels the love, that love's the best word to describe what's going on in Gamecock football, and that's why he chose to play for South Carolina moving forward. And I've talked about it many times, and how having a college football program, kind of their theme being based around love, is something that I never thought I would see, and certainly in the way that they're doing it. Also saw Pup Howard mention that he had a special connection to Luke Day, the strength coach, and he's another guy who has been very upfront and just speaks differently. I think we were talking about wrestling earlier. I mentioned interviewed Luke Day one time, and it struck me maybe somewhere in the middle of that his delivery, what I hear from him when he talks, is the combination of a pro wrestler and a pastor. And it combines with football, and man, I think it's a really effective combination. He's just a fascinating guy to listen to and to watch on the sidelines with all his energy and the whole thing. But how he kind of instantly connected with Shane Beamer. You know, he's got the struggle well philosophy, along with Eric Kemry was a big fan of that too. And so they were kind of very much on the same philosophical plane, and how they're not afraid to be deep thinkers and go with deep concepts with their players. And I mean, coming from the Steve Spurrier era, how odd that is. How Lou Holtz too. Like they were the coaches. They were going to develop the plans, tell the players what to do. You were going to do it, dang it, or you weren't going to be the guy in there. And that's how it was going to be. And Lou Holtz would ride off in his golf cart and smoke his pipe and be completely separate from the team, in my mind anyway, watching it. Steve Spurrier was going to actually eat with his guys, and he's going to make fun of them at the lunch table for not having enough color on their plate, or he was going to rip them in a film session when they didn't do exactly what they were supposed to do and embarrass them. And that was kind of his way. But I mean, he would also balance that out occasionally with the praise and do it enough in a kind of a football environment to where, you could still get guys to play hard for you. Steve Spurrier could definitely still do that. But Shane Beamer is approaching it, in a more holistic way, for lack of a better term, I think, with maybe a more 2022, 21st century type way of talking to young men developing from ages, they recruit them at 15, 16 to getting out at 22, 23, 24 maybe these days with COVID. But how this kind of goes back to Freddie Freeman as well, how I had never seen an athlete express emotions quite that freely, vulnerably, might be the best way to put it. And that's where we have evolved to, and in America in the 21st century, and the emphasis of mental health and all of that stuff. So the love portion of it does come in. And that's not what you got with the Will Muschamp era at all, right? You got, hey, you better do it or the next guy will. And also that this is your best chance to get to the NFL. This is why you're doing this. But what Eli Manning was talking about was how on the best teams he played with, on the Super Bowl winning teams he played with, he was all about, in his mind, winning it for someone else. The first Super Bowl, he said he wanted to win it for Michael Strahan, who'd been in the league for 15 years, never won a Super Bowl. The next one, he wanted to win it for kind of the next wave of guys who hadn't won it the last time. And some Victor Cruz and Mario Manningham were the names that he mentioned specifically. But it struck me as basically he was just saying something that every coach probably on every team, I think I've said it, coaching 6 to 8 year olds, right? Be a good teammate. The team isn't all about you. But to hear just Eli and Peyton kind of making that a focus of their, I assume, relatively short talk, and I'm sure they give it to multiple programs who are fortunate enough to have connections, but to know that that's the emphasis, that's what they choose to express. It dawned on me that was never really expressed at all by Will Muschamp. The importance of playing for something larger than you. And I think that's the Shane Beamer overall theme of love, like love your brother, your teammate, the sacrifice part of that. I think that's the part that was missing in the Will Muschamp era. That's where he didn't quite get it as a head coach. He didn't get to that next level, and I felt it. And I didn't know how to verbalize it. I felt it when South Carolina got a big win. Is that in year number 2? They go on the road and beat Missouri, and they show the clip of Will Muschamp in the locker room saying, we won that game in practice, and that's what we're going to go have to do next week. And that was Muschamp's mentality. And it didn't make a bit of sense to me at the time. It just struck me as, hey, that just fell flat to me in a moment of celebration and the whole thing, and where you're trying to make sure you have your team, where you do have your team's attention. You have a tremendous opportunity to capitalize on positive reinforcement, on a good performance. And you can send a strong message. And that's the message he chose to send, was just classic coach speak. And I think something that players completely tune out in those moments, especially. Like in I think that's one of those rare moments And we got to remember, these guys in major college sports are around their teams 11 months a year. And it is a very difficult thing, especially when they're at those formative ages where, first of all, you're trying to figure out how to be a man, right? And so I don't think when you're in that stage, or at least I didn't, that I was very skeptical of what I heard, because I was trying to figure it out. I was trying to question everything, kind of deal, right? That's the place I think a lot of people are in their lives, a lot of men specifically in those years. And you better communicate at a certain level with guys at that age. Otherwise they will. I think Lou Holtz got to the point where his teams tuned him out. Clearly the end of the Lou Holtz era didn't end well, with Carolina and Clemson fighting on the field, and it was pretty apparent that he had lost control of his team. I think that's one of the reasons why, because he would always rely on kind of an old bag of tricks, and at some point that grows real thin. That goes real easy to kind of tune out, especially when you're of that age and you are around your team for 11 months out of the year, man, day after day, and you're putting in so much blood, sweat, and tears, so much effort, emotion. And football is such an emotional game, and the whole thing. And that's why in that moment where the program should have been at its emotional peak, to hear a message like, hey, and we won that game on Tuesday's practice, and that's what we need to do this week, was how I remember Muschamp saying it. It was like, oh man, that ain't it. But to hear, and maybe it's how it's expressed as well, right? And that's a lot about what leadership is. It's not just what you're saying, but how you're saying it. Right? What is the old stat I saw? Like, communication is something ridiculous, like more than 60% nonverbal. Your words are such a limit. It's like 20% of how people receive your message, which is really odd for a person who has a microphone right now and thinks that words are really important. But maybe it was the way that the Mannings were expressing this, or everything that's attached to it, right? All their success through the years. And now, not just in football, but in their post-football career, doing the Manning cast, and man, how that's changed just the way that I watch football, for sure. And I think will change and will continue to change. You know, we've already seen it repeated in golf. They tried that in at least the U.S. Open, I think it was. Maybe it was the PGA. I think it'll just be continue to change. But expressing that, how important it is for good players to be good examples. And to me, that shows the love of the game from them. And then to play for something that's bigger than yourself. I mean, that's kind of an ultimate expression of love as well, right? To sacrifice for others. It just struck me as, again, something that we never got to that next level, I feel like, with Will Muschamp. And maybe that was just how that was a calculated image thing for him. And I have definitely heard that is not how he was originally at Florida as a head coach. And eventually, when some things came out and obviously the wins didn't continue to mount up, he felt betrayed, I think, by a lot of people he dealt with publicly, because comments were held against him, or maybe it just got to a hurtful place, right? So maybe that was a guarded thing that he felt like he could never get to publicly. Maybe he did do that behind closed doors. I don't know, because clearly players love playing for him. I mean, you don't have guys quit the team after your coach is fired if you didn't have loyalty and the whole thing. So there was that, but also, obviously, it wasn't a great head coaching career for Will Muschamp, and you have to come up with an explanation why. And it wasn't just that, hey, that one time at Florida where you were down a couple scores, you took forever to score once, and that didn't make any sense. It wasn't just that consistently, even though it's easy to kind of oversimplify the past and say, oh yeah, well, that guy just didn't know what he was doing. Well, that wasn't it. That's not any kind of nuanced way to look at it. I think what I heard from the Manning brothers really helped me realize how important that next step is. I think especially maybe now in the 21st century with guys who have grown up being taught much differently than I was, for sure, and certainly much differently than the generation came before me. And Freddie Freeman touched on that in some of his recent comments, talking about maybe explaining why, maybe he was asked why, excuse me, why it was so emotional for him. And he's like, well, I wasn't going to go into this thing and try to be a tough guy and pretend that playing for 15 years in the organization and 12 years for the Braves, I think it was, didn't mean anything. And I think that's exactly what my generation was taught, certainly the generation before me, is no, you do have to be a tough guy. You do have to put up that front if you want people to respect you, kind of thing. And it's a very healthy way. And that's why I think David Cohn was taught that, or that's what I took from him in Sunday Night Baseball, talking about how healthy the expression of emotion was from Freddie Freeman. He's like, man, I can't do that. I got anger issues. That was hilarious. I thought maybe in a perverse way, because I'm of maybe the same mindset, or I can identify with David Cohn a lot easier than I can identify with Freddie Freeman. But I think it was that next level that you have to connect on with players these days. And I think it's one of the reasons why you're seeing why Shane Beamer got the job, first of all, that he had a successful assistant coaching career and was able to move from place to place as much and as successfully as he did, because you never hear a bad word from his former players. And you have to have that relationship with guys. You've always had to have that, I think, but you have to have that more now than ever before, because of the value we place as a society, I think, on mental health. And maybe connecting with people is that much more important these days, because we have fewer opportunities or more opportunities to connect on superficial, technologically enhanced ways, the social media ways, right? So maybe that's where we are. Maybe that's why it's that much more important or obvious to me that that's how you can strike a chord and really separate yourself and have success as a football coach, if that makes any sense. Maybe that's just overanalyzing it way too much. We haven't done all of that today. We did start with the Gamecock baseball news, and this one is going to be, again, fascinating to see. I don't know what it's going to take, but it's going to be a big number. I think it's going to take a lot of success for Gamecock fans to come back around, because I don't think most of them, from what I'm seeing, and maybe this is taking social media comments and putting too much importance on them, but from what I'm seeing from Gamecock fans, the confidence in the baseball program is at an all-time low. And to me, it's only logical. The record was just at an all-time low this century. And it didn't come on the heels of an adjustment of coaches, right? Maybe you can, in football, I feel like especially. And again, maybe it's not fair to come at it from that perspective, but guess what? That's reality at South Carolina. If you change coaches and it's a tough first year, you say, hey, man, that's all part of the coaching transition. But you don't say that 5 years in. And to hear Mark Kingston say that they will be much improved and the health is going to be better and the depth is going to be better. And maybe it's just unfortunate for him that he's so close to the Will Muschamp era where we heard that and feel like, right, where injuries did play a heavy consideration into poor seasons. But there's nothing that guarantees that you're not going to have a rash of injuries, right? Especially if nothing is overhauled in the training process, right? Well, Muschamp had to fire a strength coach after a rash of injuries, got in a new guy. Maybe it was a little bit better, but clearly that was only a 1-year deal on the way out in the Will Muschamp era. And then and maybe this was a major part of the feel that I got from the Mark Kingston press conference yesterday. I ended up watching it not live, but later after I had already learned the news that Julian Bosnick, a big-time arm, and a guy that was going to be counted on to be a big-time pitcher for Carolina last year in the rotation, who was hurt, has now entered the transfer portal. To see Colin Burgess, a big-time piece of the puzzle, excellent, especially defensively behind the plate for Carolina for the last several years, enter the transfer portal. And not to get any kind of explanation or not to get anything to, I think, to appease frustrated fans that see that. I think that was a big miss yesterday. And Kingston is a savvy baseball guy. He mentioned he's been in it now. This is going to be his 34th year, I think, in college or professional baseball. Then I was doing the math. I was like, he must be 52 years old then, right? Or 51. You can only count from when you started playing college baseball at 17 or 18. Doesn't seem that old to me. But he's been around the block, and he knows what to say and how to say it, typically. But I didn't see anything that that kind of prepped Gamecock fans for this news coming or would help them feel better about it. And I got the opposite, actually, talking about all the success they've had in the transfer portal. Well, just from the outside looking in at the numbers coming in, at proven production coming in, and knowing what it takes to win in the SEC, I haven't read that. That has not been my read on the situation. And so that puts the program in an odd spot, in a place that I'm certainly not used to seeing it, having covered it the last couple of decades, maybe at the end of the Chad Holbrook era, but not even that much, because Holbrook was still Ray Tanner's guy, and there was still a proven track record there, certainly of recruiting guys. And the stamp of approval from Tanner himself, hiring his own successor, was there. And so that's a different situation than this one is. But we'll see how it plays out for sure. Appreciate you guys helping us play it out today on a Wednesday towards the end of June. Thank you, Anthony. You made it a great show today by the contributions, especially about you and your little girl and the wrestling trip back in the day. Teddy, Jason, Troy, appreciate all you guys helping out the show today. Hopefully my voice will be in a better place tomorrow. DC, peace out to you as well, sir. Thank you for your contributions. You guys checking out the show every single day and your support. Much appreciated. Again, for those of you that haven't, or if you want to create some more accounts and do it, that would be cool too, to subscribe to the YouTube page, the social media, Tim Hill UFA. It's out there all over the place. The website, the same as well, timhillufa.com. up and rolling, streaming live every day, Monday through Friday, 8 to 10. That's going to be the routine. Whether you do get in on the live deal or you check us out later on, it is much appreciated. All the podcast platforms up and rolling out there as well. That'll do it for today's program. Look forward to talking to you again tomorrow. Who knows what will pop up there? Let's see a couple of final comments in on today. Great show as always from Colette, and Jason loved the Terry Chick reference. That's a great way to wrap it up today. Thanks for listening to Tim Hill, Unrestricted Free Agent.